Yeah, so what we're going to do now is Marilyn and I are going to just take a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about ourselves, basically like a quick qualifier. So my name is Lisa J. I am a recovering codependent. In the last year, I moved to the Chicago area in Illinois. I came to CODA in March 16th, 1989. I was 26 years old. I was ready to drive my car off a cliff over some guy that I can't even remember his name. And I was seeing a therapist at the time, and she introduced me to a book about codependency. It is an outside literature, so I won't mention the name. However, I found a name for what I had been plagued with and doing my whole life. I knew that something was horribly wrong in my life, and I didn't have a name for it until then. And at that point, I remember going to see her after reading the book, and I remember asking her, do you think I should go to a meeting? And she's like, yeah. And so I found CODA through a series of events. It wasn't my first stop, but it was the last stop for a little bit. And I hit the ground running. I was desperate. If you had told me to get on my hands and knees and push a peanut up the driveway and that would help me to recover from codependency, I would have done it. That's how desperate I was. I got a sponsor. She wasn't the first one I asked, but she did say yes. And I began to work the steps. We didn't have any literature then, so I worked with whatever we had that was available. It was mostly outside literature, I won't lie to you, but that's the way it was at the time. Over the years since then, I've had a lot of changes in my life, and CODA has seen me through. One of the big changes happened when I was about 3 months into recovery. I recognized that I had a drinking problem, and I was encouraged to attend AA, and I'm also sober for about the same amount of time as I've been in CODA. I've worked a dual program. What I've discovered over the years is that I can use anything to take the place of God/higher power in my life. And it has been a lifelong journey now to continue to stay connected with my higher power and stay connected with program and not let those other things take over. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I think more things will be revealed as Marilyn and I talk. So I would like to turn it over to Marilyn to share a little bit about herself. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Marilyn, codependent, as always. I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada, where Lisa used to be with me before she moved. I did go to Arizona with her actually a couple of years ago, and that was nice. Anyway, I've been in CODA since 8/26 of 08, so that's a little over 12 years. I had to look up the date. I came in by invitation of my best friend's husband. He was like, you want to go to this meeting with me? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I went to that meeting with him, and they told my story. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't stop crying. And there was a lady at that meeting that said, there's a women's meeting like right after this. I'm going to it. It's across town. So I got in the car with this strange, somebody I didn't even know, and went to my second meeting. I cried every meeting for 6 months, probably. The first sponsorship situation didn't work out very well. It was a little too preachy for me. But I found a sponsor that fit, and she's been with me ever since. Can't say enough about that. At that time in my life, I went to CODA to try to fix him. There was definitely something wrong with him, and that's why we were so unhappy. And I needed to go to figure out what can I do about him. That's a lifelong issue for me. And, growing over these years and changing over these years, he's still the same guy. We're not married anymore. That took about 10 years of CODA to get to that point. I kept changing and evolving, and he stayed stuck and sick. So when I first came in, I was looking around at my life, and there was something wrong with everyone around me. And there was something wrong at work, and there was something wrong at home, and there was something wrong with my family, and there was something wrong all the way around. And in the middle of that circle was me, right? I was in the middle of that circle, and coming in and finding out that there was another way to think and another way to approach and another way to cope with everything that I thought was wrong was just amazing to me. So it's been a great journey. And step one is everywhere and everything, and it's all about step one for me still today. So with that, I'll pass it back to Lisa.
Hi, thank you, Marilyn. So obviously we are going to be talking about step one today. And I'll just give you a quick kind of overview of how we're going to be doing this. We're going to be looking at step one, what it was like. So what it was like when we first came in and looking at step one, and then how step one applies today. Marilyn was really insistent, and I agreed with her, that we needed to talk about how step one is relevant today in the now. I don't know what all of you have experienced in your time in recovery, but I have heard people say, well, I only have to do step one once and then that's it. And that hasn't been my experience, and Marilyn reflected on something very similar. So the focus of our meeting will be that we're going to talk about what it was like. So Marilyn and I will each talk about our perspective, our experience on what it was like to encounter step one. From there, we're going to do a brainstorm session about what does it mean to be powerless? And what are we powerless over? From there, we're going to do breakout sessions to allow each of you to kind of chat with each other. We're going to do groups of 4, and you'll have about 5 minutes to kind of chat with each other and talk about powerlessness and some of the things that we talked about, and then come back together, and we'll have 2 to 3 people, maybe more if we have time. You'll have a minute to share, and you'll share about what your experience was talking and such. We'll take a break, about 10 minutes, give or take. And then we're going to talk about unmanageability, and we'll do a similar format. Oh, I forgot one piece. Marilyn, I forgot one. We're going to talk about what it was like now, what it's like now, how to apply from step one now. Then we'll take a break. Then we'll go to unmanageability, similar format. We'll each talk about what it was like. We'll do a brainstorm session about unmanageability. From there, we'll do breakout groups. We'll come back, talk about what it's like now. And then if we have time for shares, we'll do that. If we don't, then we'll close up and pass it back to the committee. So with that, I believe I'm going to be passing it back to my dear friend, Marilyn. Why isn't this moving? There it goes. And Marilyn, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, so I chose a quote from it's in the handbook and the blue book. When our relationships broke down, many of us just tried harder, applying our arsenal of misinformation with a vengeance. And I was just talking to Lisa about this. The misinformation piece is so big for me there, because getting to what the truth of the matter is, when all my life it was kind of like that gaslighting, where I thought things were a certain way and I was told no, they were another way. And if you told me that what I thought wasn't true, then I was going to go with whatever the other person thought, the authority figure. It doesn't even have to be an authority figure, whoever's in front of me. And so with all that misinformation, I spent a lot of time pushing and shoving and trying to fit into something that wasn't even true for me. And the arsenal of misinformation, like all these years later, I'm still coming up against that misinformation from my childhood, from my upbringing, from my previous marriage, all those untruths, and how that relates to powerlessness. I was reading, it was great getting ready for this workshop. I read every single thing on step one that we have in every single book. And what a great thing for me. Step one is the step of admission and acceptance. I know that's been in there all this time, but when I read it, it was like brand new to me. I went, oh, so admitting that I'm powerless. And what it was like for me, oh my gosh, I was just constantly trying to figure out, to solve, to fit in, to rewrite all of those old misinformed messages. I think that's enough out of me, Lisa. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Okay, I'm waiting for my computer to cooperate. So I actually chose 2 readings, and I put one on a slide, and I'm going to read the other one. And one of the things that Marilyn and I talked about was focusing on the CODA literature and wanting to pull from the CODA literature, because our literature is written by codependents for codependents and it supports CODA. And we really wanted to model that and bring that to this workshop. So with that, to understand the growing devastation of our powerlessness and unmanageability, we must explore our past and how we arrived at this point. And I'm going to couple that with another quote that was from the 12-Step Handbook, and it said, "Will I ever be free of these burdensome thoughts?" This was a huge issue for me. So when I came into CODA, I truly believed that I had power over my thoughts and feelings, and something was horribly wrong because I couldn't make them act right. I couldn't stop my thoughts. I couldn't control my feelings. And in fact, I had been groomed and taught that I was responsible for other people's thoughts and feelings as well. And I was supposed to actually be able to intuit and figure out what other people wanted and needed. So as you can imagine, this is a wonderful formula to create codependency and to create other-centeredness. Another thing that came up for me when I saw the word powerless was helpless. I thought, if I admit that I'm powerless, that means I'm helpless. And that was completely unacceptable to me. I walked this really fine line between being a victim, and I didn't know it at the time when I came in, but I had a history of sexual abuse, molestations, et cetera, and rape, in addition to being on the other side of, I'm not going to be a victim. There's no way that I'm going to be helpless. That was unacceptable to me, so I was turning off an alarm. And so the word powerless was quite distasteful to me. And the idea of admitting powerlessness was uncomfortable. And I had some resistance to it. I really did. I knew that something was wrong. I really got that when I came into the program. I mean, obviously I got here because something wasn't working. But when I really started digging in and learning about it, to be powerless was pretty scary. So with that, we are going to move to a brainstorm. And in order to do that, I have to stop my share and restart. But what I am, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Shite, I don't know how to go backwards. Does someone know how to go backwards in PowerPoint? I'll figure it out.
Start over.
Anyway, yeah, start over. I can
like
do
we
that.
do with everything, we start over.
I'm starting over. Okay, so I'm choosing this. So the question that we want to brainstorm about and what we'll need help with is people raising hands to want to be able to share. Oh, sorry, I have to tap twice. What
And this
does,
is just like a, sorry,
go ahead.
it's just like a 30-second, give us a couple of words on what powerlessness means to you.
Okay, so we'll need help with people raising hands and being unmuted. And Marilyn, we might have to take an extra minute to let people, because it might take a minute. And I'm ready. First off, can you see the screen, Marilyn? Can you see?
I can see the screen.
Good, okay. Is it big enough or do I need to make it bigger?
One bigger would be good.
Okay.
I'm a little blind.
I'm probably gonna do like,
There you go.
how about that?
That's
Woo!
good.
We got it going. Okay, I am ready to hear what people have to say. Go ahead, Marilyn, and everybody. Didn't get a chance to speak during the brainstorm time, talk about what powerlessness is for you, maybe what you're currently dealing with, what you're currently looking at. Maybe you recognize that you're trying to control something and you're failing, or something's happening and you're battling. So we'd like to give you that time. We're going to have about 5 minutes. There'll be approximately 4 people in a room. So at this time, we are going to do the now, and I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn.
Okay. There it is. So I chose a quote from the Green Workbook, and kind of goes with what we were just talking about. Saying we are powerless over our disease out loud to the group starts us on our road of truth. We begin to identify what we're powerless over and see the manifestations of our disease. We learn to identify some of the untruths we may have been taught. We come to believe that powerless does not mean weak. And like we were discussing before in the beginning, the powerlessness thing really, it scared me. Like, what do you mean I'm powerlessness? What do you mean I can't control or change? I mean, I had spent so much time and energy trying to push and shove and make and do and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And now I don't know when the shift happened. I thought it would never happen for me. I thought powerlessness would always give me this, oh no, kind of feeling. And at some point, I'm walking along and I'm listing all the things that I'm powerless over, because that's one of the things that I was taught to do, is get out a pen and paper and just start writing them down, do a brainstorm like we just did, and just dump it onto the page, right? List out all those things. And oh my gosh, something shifts, because I realize I can't change him. I am powerless. It shifted from a place of pressure and panic of powerlessness to, what a relief. I'm powerless over this. It's not mine to solve. You know, there's all the other steps, finding a higher power and gaining all of that helped me in that shift, and the relief of it isn't all up to me, that we are here together, that it is a we program, that that sharing this with each other can bring so much relief, even when we haven't done, you know, all the work there is to do. Because I don't know that the work ever ends. It just gets it doesn't take as long anymore. It doesn't take as long for me to get to that point of, oh, that's right, I'm powerless over this. Helps so much with all of the anxiety and the feelings that go along with codependency. And back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Marilyn. So for me, I guess that wasn't the one I thought was going to come up, but there it is. Our denial of codependence fades, our acceptance increases, and we're better able to see our destructive behaviors. So I also think there were a couple other quotes that talked about responsibility and accountability. And so for me, I got to start to pay attention and be aware, because I was actually, when I came in, I was pretty asleep and was just not aware. Like when I came in, I would have told you, and I did to people, that in my family of origin, I was the problem. Everybody else was fine. I was the problem. And it wasn't until I was a few months in, and I had actually gone to treatment, because back then it was a lot easier to be able to get into treatment for codependency, and the veil began to be lifted and the wall broke down, and I began to realize that it, not from a blame perspective, but from an accountability and responsibility, that from my history, it wasn't all my fault. And in fact, what I began to understand was that there were things that happened in my history that formed who I was today. However, this denial fading and acceptance increasing meant that I'm responsible today. And I get to deal with whatever I've got today. I don't get to blame. I don't get to point fingers. And in fact, I also learned that I was responsible to set boundaries and limits with people and with myself as well, because I didn't know how to do any of that with anybody. And in fact, at some point in my life, the word no was taken away from me. And I think that that's not uncommon with young children on one level, but on another level, it can be quite devastating for young men and women. I only know about women from my side, that it can be pretty awful. And it left me open to being harmed and not being able to stand for myself and not being able to feel safe and not knowing that I had the right and the ability to say no. So for me, that was a pretty big realization to come to, that it wasn't all my fault, because I thought it was always all my fault. So with that, I do believe it is break time. So we are going to continue our discussion of step 1 with unmanageability, what it was like. And I'm going to go ahead and start off this portion. So my quote from the 12 Steps Handbook was, chances are that by the time we reached CODA, our lives were out of control. The coping skills we had relied on for a lifetime were no longer working. As I mentioned in my introduction, I was 26 years old when I came into program. And at 26 years old, which isn't very old, considering, a lot of the people that were in the meetings at the time, pardon me?
Sorry, I gotta mute this.
That's okay. So I had difficulty holding a job for more than a year. I had a series of relationships, and I do say series. There were maybe a month break in between for 9 years. I had already declared bankruptcy at that point. I was in the middle of a separation divorce to my first husband. And I was drinking alcoholically, though I didn't know it at the time. I was not aware. I had a lot of things that pointed to unmanageability. And and to be quite honest, I didn't even know to identify those things as unmanageability. So I came in very much unaware of what unmanageability meant. All I could tell you for sure was that everything that I had done up to that point had failed. Nothing was working. And I was out of options. I was out of ideas, which is how I wound up in therapy. And then you heard the rest, where I eventually came to CODA. And for me, I didn't get to say this earlier, but it was the first time I'd ever felt like I belonged somewhere. That was one of my main drives, was I wanted and deeply desired somewhere where I belonged. And it was the first time I ever felt like I was home. And I think that allowed for some of these things to begin to become clear for me. And I started letting go of those coping skills that were no longer working. And so at this point, I am going to turn it over to Marilyn.
Thank you, Lisa. I picked another section from the handbook. Our lives had become unmanageable because we had chosen to solve problems in a way that did not work. We made our well-being hinge on the imagined well-being, or lack of it, of another. So the word that comes up for me is enmeshment. And I didn't know that word. I didn't know anything about that. But I made everything that happened within me about what was happening with other people, about what they thought of me, what they thought I should do, what they thought I should be, what they thought I should da-da-da-da-da. However it was that they were feeling, whatever it was they were feeling about themselves, whatever they were feeling about me, the world. You can take it down as small as to what he thought about what I was wearing today, or as big as what he thought about what was happening globally in the world at the time. All of that, everything within me was directly tied to that. And it wasn't until quite a while in CODA, learning that came from a lot of childhood enmeshment with my mother. I was the one that was responsible for everyone's feelings. I was the screw up of the family. I was the incapable one of the family, but I was also the one that was responsible for all the feelings. Well, what a messed up setup that is for how to cope with your life. And I took that with me into all of my relationships. And unmanageability is such a big word for me now. I didn't realize that that's what my life was when I came in. The more I learn, the more I go, oh yeah. And so many times I'll be on the phone with my sponsor, and this happened, and that happened, and he's this, and she's that, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and mountains and mountains of things. And when I run out of breath, she goes, maybe that sounds like unmanageability. What do you think? And I'm like, oh, we're back to that again. But it's so true. And it can be, it can be really big, or it can be really small. It can be technical stuff like, flat tires, or it can be, I can't figure out what to feed myself today. It takes on so much. And so often it is really tied for me to the well-being of others. And for me to learn boundaries, I know that's a whole other workshop, but oh my gosh, boundaries playing such a huge place in dealing with unmanageability in my life. So with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Marilyn. And just to kind of wrap up this little bit, was my very first sponsor told me that my life is either unmanageable or I am in recovery. So now we're going to be talking about unmanageability. Okay, thank you. So we've got quite a bit here that we've talked about with unmanageability. I'm just going to put a little bold there so we can. So when I got into recovery, I was asked a question related to step one and powerlessness and unmanageability, and I want to get the words right. How did I place myself and others in danger as a result of my codependency? Now, remember, based on what we know in CODA and what we talk about in CODA, codependency is at the core of all compulsive addictive behavior. And so what I would like to do is brainstorm a little with some of us about how we put ourselves and others in danger as a result of our codependency, which could include our other addictive compulsive behaviors that we use to cope and deal with our codependency. So at this point, we are going to break into small groups. And I would ask that you talk about unmanageability, of course, because it went backwards. Why did it do that? I don't know. So we're going to break into small groups and talk about unmanageability, talk about what it is for you, what came up for you around the discussion. Maybe you discovered unmanageability that you hadn't identified as unmanageability before. Would love to have you guys talk about it, and then we'll come back together. So we are now going to move on to unmanageability today. And Marilyn and I both connected with the same quote from the Coda Blue Book. Marilyn, do you want to read it?
Yes. My screen's just half hidden. Anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can help me with that some other time. To explore our unmanageable adult codependent behaviors, we find it helpful to review the first chapter and its outline of the denial, low self-esteem, control, compliance, and then they added the avoidance patterns. We specifically list those patterns which represent our adult codependent behaviors.
Thank you, Marilyn. So I'll go ahead and share about how that relates for me now, and then I'll pass that over to Marilyn. So for me, I have come to realize that recovery from codependence was not a one and done kind of deal. Like, my codependent behaviors didn't go away like I kept expecting them to, but rather they kept showing up. But the shift or the change that took place was that I had become so connected with recovery and higher power and people around me that when the codependent crazies started to happen again, my threshold for that pain and discomfort dropped. And I would get extremely uncomfortable, and it would be like, oh, something is not right. I need to do something here. And so for me, turning to the patterns and characteristics of codependency helped me to connect with what was going on for me. And in turn, I could acknowledge, oh, I'm back in the control patterns, or I'm back in the low self-esteem, or the denial, or compliance. Oh my gosh, that's the worst. Anyway, for me. And so when I was able to recognize that I was back in them, I could then take action, make a phone call to a sponsor, do some writing, whether it was a first step writing, or maybe I needed to do a fourth step. Maybe I needed to attend a meeting. Maybe I needed to crack open the book or the piece of literature in Coda and connect with the message of recovery. And most definitely, I always needed to pray and reach out to my higher power of my understanding. And so for me, instead of staying in the codependent crazies for days, weeks, or months, it started to turn into hours and sometimes only minutes. And what I began to discover was that was recovery. And that made my life manageable. Because you can maybe imagine what it was like for me, that if I stayed that way for days, weeks, or months, I mean, it could get pretty bad for myself and others around me. But if it was only minutes or maybe even hours, there was a better chance that it wasn't going to spew out on everybody around me. And another great motivator, I know we're not doing that step, but not having to make amends is a great motivator to work a program and do things differently for me. So at this time, I'm going to pass it over to Marilyn and let her share her experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And yes, these patterns and characteristics are where I find myself, and they're also where I find my solution. When I first came in, we didn't have the recovery side. You know, we just had the codependent characteristics. So to me, it was like I could find all the things that were wrong with me in those. And then when they came up with the recovery side, I get to have that balanced view of myself. And I can look at those now and go, hey, some of these I used to do like this, and now I do like this. And so these are one of the greatest tools that I've found. When it hurts bad enough, I'm willing to do the work, and the work usually involves getting out these patterns and characteristics and finding out what about this situation, what's really going on with me. Because when I'm reacting extremely out of proportion to the situation that's happening, there's something going on with me. And I need to figure out what that is in order to get into solution. And going through the patterns and looking at a lot of the low self-esteem for myself, and a lot of the, the judgment and the criticism, and finding that in these words and knowing, okay, this is what's going on for me, doing some writing on it, calling my sponsor, and all those other tools that we have, that helps me, like was said before, get out of the unmanageability quicker. Because I used to stay in unmanageability so long that I would get really, really sick. There were periods of time where I stayed in bed for weeks, and couldn't, just couldn't cope with my life. Stuff still happens. My life didn't magically, everything's lining up just perfectly. Stuff is still happening, and it seems I'm having a really big season of that. And I think globally, we all are, because of what's happening right now, because of the pandemic, because of, political whatever. And just there's a global kind of feeling of dis-ease, and that can feed into a lot of our unmanageability. So knowing that I can work this step in the big picture, and I can take these patterns and work them in the big picture, and I can also work them on exactly what's happening today. Something happened with my mother. She pushed a trigger. I need to deal with it, because today I don't want to react to her like I'm 5 years old. Today I want to react to her as the grown-up loving person that I am and that she is. And the only way I can do that is by doing this work and not creating all the chaos and unmanageability in my life. And I think that's what I got on that. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. And so we wanted to the step 1 prayer that shows up in the 12 Steps Handbook, and it also shows up in the little CODA prayer booklet. And I think we could all say it together before they have to close the meeting, if we could.
Okay. Step 1 prayer. In this moment, I do not have to control anyone, including me. And if I feel uncomfortable with what another person is doing or not doing, I can remind myself that I'm powerless over this person, and I'm powerless over my compulsion to act in inappropriate ways.
Awesome, thank you. I typed it in a little different, and I apologize, I might have missed something.
I was reading.
And that's okay. Yep, it's all good. It's all good.
Chills.
Okay. So, Marilyn, did you have any closing thoughts before we turn it back over to the committee?
Just thank you so much, everyone, for all your participation, and for all the brainstorming and being vulnerable and sharing with us and being open, because it's, step 1 is everything to me. So I really appreciate it.
And I know for myself that it was very timely, because I encountered a couple of situations in the last week or so, actually the last couple of weeks, where remembering that I am powerless was key to getting through the situations. Dealing with a little bit of a health issue. I'm clearly not 26 anymore. And so there are some health issues that can come with getting a little older, and finding my way through that with grace and dignity and my higher power is a really big deal. And so there was one night this last week where 2:00 in the morning, it was me and my higher power, and I'm claiming powerlessness in my life and cruising through the steps to get to my higher power and say, I turn this over to you. So I always find that whenever I'm doing anything related to recovery and service, that it's never an accident, it's never coincidence. The timing is perfect. And I too am very grateful and thankful for everybody who showed up, who shared vulnerably, honestly, openly. I especially want to thank the new people who are here, people who are new to CODA, people who had the courage to say, hey, you know what? I don't have any answers right now, but I'm soaking this up like a sponge. I applaud you and thank you for being here. We need you. I need you. I'll speak for myself, because that's what I've learned to do. I need you. And so with that, thank you all again, and we will turn it over to the committee. And thank you, Marilyn.
And
I love you.
Lisa. And thank you to the committee for putting
Oh,
this all
absolutely.
on and for doing all the techno stuff. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you all so much. You're the best.